The Delta variant still has Australia in its grip, with New South Wales entering the fifth week of lockdowns. The Australian economy will be impacted through lower household consumption as a result of lockdown restrictions. However, the negative economic consequences will be less severe than last year because the population is able to learn from past experiences. While inflation reached a high point of 3.8%, this is seen as temporary by the central bank. According to the RBA, wage growth should be above 3% for inflation to be structurally within the 2 to 3% target range. The RBA does not expect this scenario to materialize before 2024, although some economic conditions are in place for higher wage growth to occur. Several Australian states have been in and out of lockdown since the beginning of May. Sydney and the state of New South Wales have the most to endure and are now entering the fifth week of lockdowns. So what will be the economic impact of current lockdowns?
We know that government-imposed lockdowns induce collateral damage, both social and economic. From an economic perspective, this led to a contraction of 2.4% of the Australian economy in 2020, which could have been much worse if the government had not stepped in. An effective way of assessing the potential impact of new lockdown measures is to look at mobility indicators. The logic behind this approach is that consumption makes up a large share of the total economy. The figure shows that activity levels, Australia total, are close to the levels of Q3 last year. The combination of people's fear of becoming infected and the restrictions of government-imposed lockdowns limited consumer spending, and thus consumption, in Q3. Consumers might be able to shift part of their spending toward goods, as seen in earlier lockdowns, in which case the main impact will be felt in service-related sectors. Another limitation on consumer spending is the potential drop in income as a result of reduced working hours, caused by lower demand for goods and services. Previously, this was covered by the JobKeeper payments. This program will not be reintroduced, but the government will pay employees on the basis of lost hours of work through the COVID-19 disaster payment program. This will help to keep consumption levels somewhat elevated.
On July 7, the RBA took its much-anticipated monetary policy decision. The RBA decided to not roll over the maturity of the 3-year bond yield target and thus retain the April 2024 bond as a target bond with a yield target of 10 basis points. Furthermore, they decided to slightly taper the purchase of government bonds from $5 billion a week down to $4 billion Australian dollars a week until at least November 2021. They will then assess the asset purchasing program in light of the economic outlook at that time. This grants the RBA some flexibility to tailor the asset purchasing program according to the future economic situation. In addition, the RBA decided to maintain the cash rate target at 10 basis points and interest rate on exchange settlement balances on 0%.
In isolation, these decisions could be defined as tightening monetary policy, given that the bond maturity has not been rolled over to the next maturity and that the amount of asset purchases slightly decreased. However, if we put the decision into context, we see that the RBA is still ultra-accommodative. Firstly, many economic indicators are far more positive than anticipated. For example, the Q1 economic growth of 1.8% quarter-on-quarter on the back of higher than expected investments, recent tightening of the labor market, and the surging housing market. Secondly, by comparison, other central banks have tightened monetary policy as a reaction to similar positive economic developments. For example, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has halted additional asset purchases since July 23. Thirdly, inflation reached a high point of 3.8%, but the trimmed mean is only 1.6%, which is a less alarming number. Moreover, this peak was expected, due to the low base of last year and accelerated demand as a result of the economic recovery. The RBA sees this rise in inflation as temporary. Nonetheless, real wage growth is negative with such inflation numbers, which makes the situation increasingly complex. Negative wage growth affects the purchasing power of workers, leading to lower consumer demand and limiting economic growth. Furthermore, negative real wage growth has the potential to increase inequality. So what can we expect from the RBA?
Since the RBA sees this peak inflation as temporary, they are focusing on more structural factors for inflation. In his recent speech, RBA Governor Lowe mentions, for inflation to be sustainably in the 2 to 3% range, it is likely that wage growth will need to exceed 3%. Currently this is about 1.5%, which is materially lower, and there are several reasons why the RBA does not expect this to rise quickly. For now, the RBA does not expect this scenario to occur before 2024. Obviously, the current lockdowns cause a step back on the path toward full employment and potential wage growth. But the labor market has proven to be resilient over the past months. Taken in combination with high economic growth and closed borders, we could see wage growth picking up sooner rather than later. And with regard to that last point, Governor Lowe mentioned that wages cannot go up as easily with high levels of migrant workers. With some sectors dependent on migrant workers and new federal elections coming up within a year, this could well be an issue for debate. All in all, these will be key developments to monitor in the months ahead.
Please subscribe, like, and share. It really helps us out, and hope to see you next time.